Students, in lesson 4.2, you are going to be working on multiplying decimals and whole numbers. So our essential question that will guide our learning is, how can you use a model to multiply a whole number and a decimal? And in this actual lesson, boys and girls, you are going to be taught two different strategies. I would suggest that the strategy that you feel the weakest on, meaning not strong, that is the one that you practice and you re-practice. And remember, boys and girls, there's always the Read Teach Guide for Go Math that you can use, which is posted on Schoology for this lesson, which is lesson point 2. So let's get started. I'm going to start with our investigate. It says we're going to need a decimal model and color pencils. In school, I taught you how to use your pencil to make different techniques if you don't have access to color pencils. But if you'd like to use color pencils with this, you definitely can as well. So we're going to start with our giant tortoise. The giant tortoise moves very slowly. They can travel a distance of about 1/1700th mile in 1 hour. If it travels at the same speed, how far could a giant tortoise move in 4 hours? So we're going to start with part A, boys and girls. It says complete the statement to describe the problem. So we know I need to find out how many total miles are in 4 groups because we're going to do 4 hours. And in each of those, we know that there is 1/1700th mile within each of those 4 groups that we're going to do. So now, boys and girls, it's asking us to write an expression. And remember, an expression has numbers and an operation sign. So let's write an expression that represents the problem. We know that there are going to be 4 hours, so we're going to use 4 times 1/1700ths. And then right off the bat, boys and girls, we can see that this is indeed a whole number and a decimal, which is what we're working on multiplying today. So we can go on to step B now. Step B, it says use the decimal model to find the answer. And this is the first strategy that we're going to use today, boys and girls. It says, what does each small square in the decimal model represent? And remember, we talked about this. There are 100 of these little squares in here. If we're talking about one of them, we know that represents 1/100th. So I want to write down 1/100th in word form, and then I'm also going to write down 1/100th in decimal form. Now let's go down to start part C. It says shade a group of 17 squares. And the reason why we're going to shade 17 squares, boys and girls, is we know that there are 100 squares, but we're only going to shade 17. Because remember, the tortoise travels 1/1700ths of a mile each hour. Next, let's go on and start shading. So let's shade our first group. We're going to use green and red to kind of separate it out. So this is 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. So we've shaded our first group and we have 17. Now it says to use different colors to shade each additional group. So boys and girls, remember, we're going to make how many groups? 4 groups. So boys and girls, this might be a good to pause the video. As you can see, I've shaded 4 groups. 1, 2, 3, 4, and each group I've shaded 17 squares. So it says use different colors to shade each additional group contain 17 squares until you have 4 groups of 17 squares. If you go back up here, you can see that I have 1, 2, 3, 4 groups, and in each of those groups you should have 17 squares. Remember, if you don't have color pencils, that's okay. You can simply use our shading techniques, which in class looked like those little dash marks, and then we used dots for the other ones. If you want to use that instead, that's totally fine. Now, boys and girls, it says record the total number of squares shaded. Now, a lot of kids will go through and they'll count each individual square, but that's not necessary. What we can simply do is count down the columns because we know each column contains 10. So we have 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 61, 62, 63, 64, 65, 66, 67, 68. So boys and girls, we know that there are 68 squares shaded, but we know that each of those squares actually represents 1/100th. So we know that the giant tortoise can move 1/6800ths mile in 1 hour. So now we're going to go on to the draw conclusions. So in draw conclusions, it says, explain why you would use only one decimal model to show the product. So boys and girls, what we can say is that the model, the 10 by 10 grid, shows 100 hundredths. And we know that because there's 100 squares within that larger 10 by 10 grid. And the product is 68 hundredths. That was our answer. So we know that we only need one whole decimal model to demonstrate that answer. Now we're going to go on to number 2. Explain how the product of 4 groups of 17 hundredths is similar to the product of 4 groups of 17. And then it says also say how it is different. So both products have the same digits. Because they have the same factors, we know that they'll have the same digits in their same factors, I should say. They have the same digits in their factors, so they will have the same digits in their product. Same digit in both factors, same digit in the product. However, the decimal point will be different in places. So remember, the decimal point will be in a different place, because here we have 2 whole numbers, there will be no decimal point, but here we have a whole number and a decimal, and there will be a decimal point. Lastly, we have the higher order thinking question. And remember, boys and girls, whenever we get to a hot question, we know it's a challenging question that is showing us and allowing us to extend our ideas and our knowledge of the mathematical concepts in the lesson. So it says, compare the product of 17 hundredths and 4 with each of the factors. Which number has the greatest value? And then also it says, explain how this is different than multiplying 2 whole numbers. So boys and girls, in 17 hundredths and 4, we know that 4 is the greater number because $4 is bigger than 17 cents. So the factor 4 has the greatest value. Now it's asking us to explain how this is different than multiplying 2 whole numbers. Right now we have a decimal multiplied by a whole number, and this is what we talked about yesterday. Because it's a decimal and it's less than 1, it's going to decrease the amount in our products. So boys and girls, keep in mind when you multiply 2 whole numbers together, the product has the greatest value. Remember, whenever you have a whole number times a whole number, the product is going to have the greater value. However, because here we have a decimal and a whole number, the product is going to decrease and it is not going to be the largest number. So boys and girls, keep in mind you can pause the video at this time and finish completing your draw conclusion section if you need to. Now we're going to go on to make connections. It says you can draw a quick picture to solve the decimal multiplication problems. So boys and girls, here we have our problem. It says find the product of 3 and 46 hundredths. So step 1 is to draw 3 groups of 4 tenths and 6 hundredths, because we have 4 tenths and 6 hundredths, and we're going to make 3 groups. And it says, remember, a square is equal to 1. So I'm going to draw my quick drawing here on the side. So boys and girls, if you take a look on the side, you're going to see 1 tenth, 2 tenths, 3 tenths, 4 tenths. And then remember that these little circles represent a hundredth. So we have 2 hundredths, 3 hundredths, 4 hundredths, 2 hundredths, 4, 6 hundredths. Sorry about that, boys and girls. So this is 46 hundredths, that's 1 group. This is another 46 hundredths, that's 2 groups. This is 46 hundredths, that's going to be 3 groups. So we are done with step 1. Now we're going to go on to step 2. It says combine the hundredths and rename. So what we're going to do, boys and girls, is we're going to see if we have 10 hundredths, because if we get 10 hundredths, that's when we can regroup. So we have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Now we're going to regroup, boys and girls, and we're going to get a tenth. Let's see if we can do that again. We have 2, 4, 6, 8. So we can't regroup, boys and girls. So what we're going to say is we're going to recap what we just did. So in step 2, it says combine the hundredths and rename. So we saw that there were 18 hundredths, boys and girls. We will rename 10 hundredths as 1 tenth, in which we did, which is in an orange. And we crossed out in orange the hundredths that we regrouped, or you can say renamed. So now we're going to go on to step 3, boys and girls. Step 3, it says combine the tenths and rename. So we're going to do just what we did with the last one, but we're going to use green to cross out our tenths. Remember, when we get 10 tenths, we can trade for 1 whole. 1 tenth, 2 tenths, 3 tenths, 4 tenths, 5 tenths, 6 tenths, 7 tenths, 8 tenths, 9 tenths, 10 tenths. So boys and girls, when we get 10 tenths, we're going to trade for 1 whole. So boys and girls, we can look here and we see that there's 3 more tenths. So in total, there are 13 tenths. We're only going to rename 10 tenths as 1, 1, and we crossed off in green the ones that we renamed. Now, boys and girls, we are going to be going to step 4, which in step 4, it says record the values shown by your completed quick drawing. So we can see, boys and girls, we have 1 whole, 3 tenths, and 2, 4, 6, 8 hundredths. So our answer is 1 and 38 hundredths. And girls, something I want you to keep in mind at the bottom of this page, it says the math talk. Explain how renaming decimals is like renaming whole numbers. Well, we know, boys and girls, whenever we get more than 9 in a place, we have to rename the value. So remember, when we got 9 hundredths, we went up to 10 hundredths, we renamed. When we got 10 tenths, we renamed. So that's just a way to connect the decimal models to the whole number models, which we worked a lot with this year already.